BBC World Service. Now, BBC Learning English.
Hello and welcome to Talk About English. I'm Callum Robertson. In today's programme we're going to be looking at the topic of pronunciation. What makes good pronunciation, and what is it that native speakers do when they're talking that you can do to make your spoken English more fluent and natural? To discuss these topics I've been joined today by teacher trainer and materials writer Alan Stanton. Hello Alan.
Hello.
When learning a language, there are many things to study and practice, such as vocabulary and grammar, skills like reading, writing and speaking. A key to good speaking is good pronunciation. Alan, first, how important do you think pronunciation is as a language skill, and what do we mean by good pronunciation?
Well, people want to be understood when they speak to others. They don't want their words to be mistaken for other words because they haven't pronounced them very well. I remember here a story, and this is an absolutely true story, about a lady who was visiting London and she wanted to buy a train ticket to Istanbul in Turkey. So she went to Victoria Station to inquire about trains to Turkey, and unfortunately she was sold a ticket to Torquay, which is a town in the southwest of England in completely the opposite direction. Now, there is a difference between Turkey and Torquay.
So good pronunciation is important because you could easily be misunderstood.
Yes, I think good pronunciation has to be clear and comprehensible, not placing a strain on the listener and making your meaning absolutely clear so that you are not misunderstood. But of course, it doesn't have to be a perfect imitation of any particular native speaker accent.
Right, so where do learners, or where should learners start with pronunciation? Because something students often say is the spelling of English is very different from the pronunciation.
We have 26 letters in the alphabet that we use in English, but we have 44 sounds. So the spelling is not always a good guide to the pronunciation. But we can use phonemic symbols, and there are 44 phonemic symbols, one for each sound, and these symbols represent the sounds of words accurately. And it's possible to find out the correct pronunciation of a word by using a dictionary, because after the spelling of the word, the next thing is that word in phonemic symbols. And if you know these symbols, and they're not really difficult to learn, you can find out the pronunciation just by looking in the dictionary. You don't have to ask your teacher.
Now, you mentioned before that students don't need to have a native speaker accent. Is that right?
I think that's right. I mean, there are many acceptable native speaker accents. There's not simply one native speaker accent in English. And providing people's pronunciation is clear and comprehensible, it doesn't matter if they have an accent from their first language. I don't think that's a problem at all. However, I think it's important to understand native speakers whose speech inevitably will be fast and fluent, and this may cause difficulties for learners. And I think it's important to know what native speakers do when they speak, because it helps in comprehension, and it's useful for listening to the radio, for television, for films. Even if you don't actually meet many native speakers face to face, you may well be exposed to lots of native speaker English through electronic media.
So let's have a look now at some of these things that native speakers do when we're speaking. So what's the first one that comes to mind?
One important feature is the weak pronunciation of vowel sounds. For example, the word and is often pronounced n in phrases like fish and chips, and the preposition to is often pronounced as t. If you say let's go to Cambridge, for example, it just sounds like t.
You almost don't hear it at all. It's so short, and that's, I presume, why they call it weak.
Yes, in fact, there's a name for this weak form. It's called schwa, and the phonemic symbol looks like an upside down E, and it's very common.
So that's schwa, the weak form, and we'll be hearing some examples of that later on in the programme. But there's another interesting thing about spelling and pronunciation, is that the number of letters in a word is not the same as the number of sounds in a word.
That's right. There are some words, like the word cat, C-A-T, where we can hear every sound that appears in the spelling. 3 letters and 3 sounds. But in contrast, if we take a word such as catch, there are 5 letters, C-A-T-C-H, but there are only 3 sounds, k, a, ch. So therefore 3 phonemic symbols will appear in the dictionary. If we take the past tense of that word, caught, C-A-U-G-H-T, 6 letters, but only 3 sounds, k or t.
So it is important for students to not get too hung up on spelling and be aware that pronunciation and spelling have slightly different rules.
That's absolutely true.
You're listening to Talk About English from the BBC World Service.
Today we're talking about pronunciation with Alan Stanton. We're going to look now at something that's very common in the way that people speak naturally. And we've looked at individual words, but we don't usually speak in individual words, do we, Alan?
No, in writing you can see the gaps between words, but when people are speaking, you can't hear gaps between words. The words are often joined together, so 2 or 3 words may sound like one word. If we take the phrase, I'll say this very slowly to start with, a cup of tea. We have 4 words there, but the normal way to say that is a cup of tea. A cup of tea. And in particular, what is happening there is that cup is joining with the next word, of, or of, because it's the weak form here, to produce cup of. So cup of tea may sound just as if it is one word and not 4 words.
So this is what we call linking here.
It's called linking. It's called linking. And the particular example we've looked at in that phrase, a cup of tea, is a word which ends with a consonant sound, joining to a word which begins with a vowel sound. So cup of becomes cup of tea.
Cup of tea. Now, this is very, very common, this feature, isn't it, Alan? And you can find it in just about any example of native speech. Now, we've got a short section here from a BBC News report which has a number of these linking features in it. We'll look in detail at what these features are shortly, but as you listen to this piece from a news story about traffic problems in a small Russian town, see if you can pick out any of these linkings that are going on. Here's the news report.
By Russian standards, Tashtagol is a tiny little town, just 20,000 people, a few streets and a handful of roads. So you may be surprised to learn that traffic problems here have been causing chaos, not because of cars, but because of cows.
So, Alan, what were some of the linking features that we heard there? Anything you would like to highlight?
Well, I think we can hear the 2 words is pronounced as isa.
Okay, should we just have a listen to that?
Tashtagol is a tiny little town.
So, Tashtagol is a tiny little town. Is a, yes. Any others?
Well, I think we can hear a few streets and a handful of roads. We have some linking there.
Okay, let's just have a listen to that little bit.
A few streets and a handful of roads.
So yes, so we had and a handful of roads becomes and a handful of, and a handful of.
That's right. That's right.
And one more in there.
Yes, well, twice we heard because of, the weak form of and the sound at the end of because, linking to the word of in its weak form. So we heard because of cars and because of cows.
Okay, let's listen to that.
Not because of cars, but because of cows.
So those examples show mainly linking from a consonant to a weak vowel, but it's not just weak vowels that this linking happens to. It can also happen with strong vowels as well. And we have an example of that here. I wonder if you can pick it up when you listen to it.
Don't forget to switch off the light before you go out.
And let's listen to that one more time.
Don't forget to switch off the light before you go out.
Okay, so what's the linking there, Alan? What's
Well,
going
when you listen to that, it may sound as if you're hearing a word choff, but of course there's no such word as choff. It's switch off linked together, so switch off the lights.
on? Okay, so that's a strong form of there.
Yeah. And that reminds me of another absolutely true story about one of my students who said to me one day, Alan, what is a deg? And I said, well, I don't think deg is an English word at all. I've never heard that word. And he said, yes, it's an English word, because every morning in the hotel where I'm staying, the waitress says to me, would you like a fried egg?
A fried egg.
Yeah, so it's...
Well, what should that be for those who might not be with us on that?
Well, it's fried, and then egg.
Right, so
But
we've linked
They link together, so it's fried egg.
Right, okay. Yes, I've never had a deg myself, but I do like a fried egg.
Better scrambled.
A scrambled egg.
A scrambled egg.
A scrambled egg. So that's consonant to vowel linking, but it's not the only kind of linking there is. There's another example in that sentence that we were listening to about switch off. If you listen to the end, the last two words, there's another kind of linking. Let's listen to that once more.
Don't forget to switch off the light before you go out.
Before you go out. What's happening there, Alan?
Well, we have two words there. We have go and we have out. Now, go ends with a vowel sound and out begins with a vowel sound. Now, to make a smooth transition between the two sounds, there is a linking w sound. So it's not go out. There's no linking there. It's go out, go out. This is called a linking w. There is also another linking sound, which is a linking y sound. If we say see it, see it, see it, there's a linking y. So there are two sounds, linking w and linking y, which make a connection between two vowel sounds, the last vowel sound of one word and the first vowel sound of the next word.
Is that something that students can learn to do?
Well, in a way, students don't really need to learn it in a very conscious way, because as you begin to speak more fluently, it happens automatically by itself. So in fact, you shouldn't really try hard to do it, because it's supposed to be easy and effortless and natural. It's not emphatic, and if you try and do it deliberately, you will emphasize it, and that's completely the wrong idea.
Right. I wonder if you could just give us a few more examples of where this happens.
Yes, I think a good way to remember this is to remember the phrase 3 eggs, where you have a linking y sound, and 2 eggs, where you have a linking w sound, because you get the linking y sound with words ending with sounds such as E or I or I, and you get the linking w sound when the first word ends in O or U or oo or a sound like that.
I'm afraid that's all the time we have today in Talk About English. Alan, before we go, I wonder if you can quickly recap what are the points we've looked at today?
Well, today we looked at weak forms. We looked at the number of letters in a word not being the same as the number of sounds. We looked at the final consonant sound in a word linking to the vowel sound of the next word. And we looked at the final vowel linking to the vowel beginning the next word, as in 2 eggs and 3 eggs.
Thank you very much, Alan.
Thank you.
Well, remember, you can listen to our programmes online and do a range of pronunciation exercises and practice on our website. That's at bbclearningenglish.com.
BBC World Service. Now, BBC Learning English.
Hello and welcome to Talk About English. I'm Callum Robertson. In today's programme we're looking at the topic of pronunciation. We'll be answering a question on spelling and pronunciation and also looking at what happens to certain sounds in words when people are speaking naturally and fluently. That's all coming up in Talk About English. First today, a question sent in by a visitor to our website. Rohini, who's living in the United States, wants to know why we use the article in front of the word European. European begins with the letter E, which is a vowel. So why don't we use an instead of To answer this question and to talk to us about pronunciation today, I've been joined by teacher trainer and materials writer Alan Stanton. Alan, what can you tell us about this question?
Well, the reason is that European begins with the letter E, which is a vowel letter, but it doesn't begin with a vowel sound. It begins European, and the Y is a consonant sound, so we say European. The rule about using or n is based on sound and not on spelling. Other interesting examples would be the phrase an honest man. Now, honest begins with H, a consonant, but we don't pronounce it. We start with the vowel sound O, so we say an honest man. Another example is the difference between a university, that begins with Y, and an uncle. Both those words begin with the same letter, the letter U, but university has a Y sound at the beginning, and uncle an sound at the beginning. So the thing to remember is that it's a sound-based rule and not a spelling-based rule.
So this is an example of how pronunciation actually dictates the spelling. European may look wrong on the page, but when it's pronounced, it's correct. And these boundaries between words are what we try and make as smooth as possible, and we do different things to make those boundaries smooth. So, Alan, what are some of the things we do?
Well, there's a natural tendency to join words together in the easiest, simplest and smoothest way. It simply makes life easier when we're speaking. For example, we have consonant sound to vowel sound linking in phrases such as out of order, where the final consonant sound links to a following vowel sound. We have a linking w sound between two vowel sounds. For example, if we say no entry, we can hear a linking w between the word no and entry, no entry. In a phrase such as see it, we can hear a linking y sound between see and it, see it. And these linking sounds simply make it easier to say those phrases.
And there's another kind of linking which we haven't looked at yet, isn't there?
Yes, that's to do with the sound represented by the letter R, a R sound. Now, in some forms of British English, people pronounce the R every time it appears in the spelling. But the variety of English that we are speaking now, Callum, we don't do that. We don't always pronounce the letter R when we see it in the spelling. In particular, if it comes at the end of a word, for example, if we take a word such as car or door or star, these all end with the letter R, but we don't pronounce that letter. We don't sound the R sound when we say the word in isolation. But if it's followed by a vowel sound, we do reintroduce the sound of the letter R. For example, we can say there by itself without an R sound, but we say there is, where we can hear a linking R. If we say the number 4 by itself, we don't sound the letter R. But if we say 4 eggs, we can hear that linking R joining to the following vowel sound. Some other examples are, if we say, where is the car? Where is the car? We have no R sound at the end of car because nothing follows. That's the end of the question. But we say, where is, so it's where is the car? If we say, the car is here, then we have a linking R because it's followed by is. The car is here.
But this is a feature that is really only typical of a certain kind of English, the kind of English we're talking now, I suppose a BBC English, as it might be called. If you go to other parts of Great Britain, for example, Scotland, there they do pronounce the R at the end of words, don't they?
Yes, they'll pronounce it every time it's there in the spelling. Therefore, as far as learners are concerned, they should do whatever feels most natural for them, because if they feel happier pronouncing the letter R whenever they see it in the spelling, then they should do so. Either way is acceptable.
Today we're looking at some more features of natural, fluent speech. What is it that happens when native speakers are talking that makes it difficult to catch the words even when you know them? One thing we've looked at is linking, which sometimes changes or adds a sound to make it easier to say, but there are other things that also happen.
Yes, we've looked at some kinds of linking, but what we're going to look at now is what happens when a word ends with a consonant sound and the next word begins with the same or a very similar consonant sound.
And we have an example of that here.
I'm a bit tired. I'm a bit tired.
So, what can you highlight from that brief example there, Alan?
Well, of course we've got the linking of I'm, the weak form of but the interesting thing here is the sound of the word bit. When we say the word bit in isolation, of course we can hear the t sound at the end, but in this case the word bit is followed by the word tired. So bit ends in t and tired begins in t, same sound. Now when this happens, we don't hear both of those t sounds. We only really hear one. What happens is that we are ready and our tongue is in the right position to pronounce t at the end of bit, but we don't release that sound until we start to say tired. So it sounds like this: I'm a bit tired. It's not I'm a bit tired, it's I'm a bit tired.
Presumably because it's a lot easier to say
Yes.
a bit tired than a bit tired.
Yeah, that's exactly the point. It's simply easier to say I'm a bit tired. So we always choose the easiest way of saying something.
Okay, and we've got some more examples of that now. Just have a listen to these and listen to the same thing happening.
We have a lot to do.
Tell me what to say.
Well, it's the same point. We had a lot to do. Tell me what to say. We're hearing just one t sound there and not two separate sounds.
And is this something that you think students can actually practice?
I think learners should not really try to practice it, because the whole point about this is that it happens in a very natural way without making any effort at all. So there's really no point in deliberately trying to practice it and putting any kind of emphasis on it, because the point is there is no emphasis there at all. But I think it's useful for learners to know that this happens, because it can help learners understand what they hear, and it may help them sometimes to work out the grammar.
Yes, that's a good point. Well, have a listen to some examples of that. Now, when you listen to these examples, can you tell what tense is being used? Listen to these examples. What tense is being used?
I've finished it.
She slept for 3 hours.
Let's hear those once again.
I've finished it.
She slept for 3 hours.
So, Alan, I've finished it. She slept for 3 hours.
Yes, well, I know what tense these are because I can see them written down in front of me. So I know they're both present perfect. It's I have finished and she has slept. But when I hear them, I can't tell the difference between present perfect and past simple in those examples. What's happened there is that we've reduced have to v, and we don't hear it separately from the v sound at the beginning of finish. So it's I've finished. And in the case of has, we've reduced it to s, and then we don't hear it separately from the following s sound in slept. So really, in those examples and similar examples, we can't hear the difference between the present perfect and the past simple. Now, of course, In real-life situations, this is never a problem because the context makes it clear which tense we're using. Or we may hear other words such as yesterday or last week, which we can use with the past simple, but not with the present perfect. In fact, it may not matter very much which tense we're using, and if learners make a mistake with their tenses, it's quite likely that people won't actually notice that they've made the mistake because they can't hear the difference. Obviously, it matters a lot when you're writing because you can see it very plainly when it's written on paper. But in real-life speech, the differences are not always so obvious.
Right. I don't know how many teachers would feel about that piece of advice, but yes, it is true. When you're speaking, sometimes even if you get it wrong, nobody notices.
I think that's right.
You're listening to Talk About English from the BBC World Service.
There's one more feature of fluent connected speech that we're going to look at today, and I wonder if you can work out what it is. You're going to hear a number of examples, and in each case you'll hear the word, and then you'll hear that word in a sentence. Something will happen to that word in the sentence. Can you work out what it is? Here's a clue. Concentrate on the last sound of the word. The last sound of the word. Here are the examples.
Next. I'm going next week. Next. Next week.
Worst. That was the worst job I ever had. Worst. Worst job.
Just. Just one person came to the party. Just one.
Can't. I can't swim. Can't swim.
So did you hear the differences there? Alan, what's happening?
Well, what's happening is this. In rapid speech, the t sound at the end of a word often disappears completely if there are consonant sounds on either side of that t sound. In other words, when we have 3 consonant sounds in a row and the one in the middle is t, that t sound will often disappear. We can hear this in individual words. If we take the word postman, for example, the normal way of pronouncing postman is with no t sound in the middle. Of course, we can slow down our pronunciation and say postman if we wish, but normally we just say postman. Similarly, we say Westminster and not Westminster. And this happens within individual separate words, and it happens from one word followed by the next word. In the examples we heard, for example, we heard worst job, where in fact we've got 4 consonant sounds in a row. That's quite difficult to do in English, and one of them, the t, simply disappears. So we have worst and worst job.
Are there any other consonants that disappear when they're between 2 other consonants, as with the t sound we've just talked about?
Yes, it often happens to d sound. Of course, that's very similar to t. T and d are probably the most common.
Well, that's all from today's programme. Before we go, a quick recap on today's features. Alan.
Well, we've looked at the feature known as linking R. That's to say the difference between saying 4 and 4 eggs. When we say 4 eggs, we can hear the linking R. When we say where is it, we can hear the linking R. We also looked at the way in which 2 consonant sounds can merge together in examples like a bit tired and a lot to do. And we looked at how some sounds can completely disappear in words like postman and in phrases like the longest day.
Okay, thank you very much, Alan.
Thank you.
Remember, you can find out more about learning English at our website, bbclearningenglish.com. Hope you can join us next time for more Talk About English. Goodbye.
BBC World Service. Now, BBC Learning English.
Hello and welcome to Talk About English. I'm Callum Robertson. In today's programme we're looking at the topic of pronunciation and in particular what happens to words when they are pronounced not by themselves but as part of everyday speech. To discuss these topics I've been joined by teacher trainer and materials writer Alan Stanton. Hello Alan.
Hello.
When studying vocabulary, it's important to find out how a word is pronounced. And if you know the phonemic symbols which represent the sounds of English, you can use a dictionary to find out the pronunciation. However, unfortunately, words aren't always pronounced the same. The pronunciation of a word can change in normal speech. Alan, can you give us some examples of this?
Well, there are different types of linking. For example, there's linking of a final consonant sound to a following vowel sound. For example, in the phrase fried egg. There's also linking of a final vowel sound with an initial vowel sound, either with a linking w sound, for example, in the phrase 2 eggs, or with a linking y sound, for example, in the phrase 3 eggs. Also, another form of linking is when one word ends in a consonant sound and the next begins with a consonant sound, and when that happens, we don't hear two separate consonant sounds. We just hear one. For example, if we say a bit tired, for example. And then there is also elision, where sounds that we can see in the spelling disappear in the pronunciation. This particularly affects the sound t, represented by the letter T, when it has a consonant sound on either side of it. For example, in the phrase just do it, where we don't pronounce the t at the end of just.
So we've seen that in speech sounds link, they merge, and they even disappear. But unfortunately, that's not all that they can do. Sounds can also change. Now, here's an example. Listen to two words said individually, then listen to them in a sentence. Can you hear the difference? What is happening where the two words meet?
Good girl. She's a good girl. Good girl. Good girl.
So, Alan, what's happening there?
The sound at the end of the first word is becoming like the sound at the beginning of the second word. So, the d sound at the end of good is becoming like the g sound at the start of girl. It doesn't actually disappear, it actually sounds like a g. So it sounds like good girl.
Good girl. If you can't separate it, but if you did, it would sound like gug.
That's right.
Okay, and why is this happening?
Well, this feature of connected speech is called assimilation. And what's happening is that when we speak fairly fast and fluently, our lips and our tongue are getting into the correct position for the next sound before we've really finished saying the sound before. So the preceding sound starts to resemble the following sound, simply because of the speed at which our tongue and our lips are moving.
So our brains and our mouths are thinking ahead of what we're actually saying.
That's correct.
Okay. Now we have some more examples here showing different things, and I think in this example we can hear how one word can be pronounced in a few different ways. Let's hear some more examples.
We can go now. We can go now. Can go. Can go. We can buy it. We can buy it. Can buy. Can buy.
So, Alan, a number of different ways there of how the word can is pronounced.
Yes, in fact, we've got 4 possible ways of pronouncing the word can. We may hear it as can, which is the strong way of pronouncing that word. We may hear the weak form, can, or we may hear 2 different assimilated forms. For example, we can go, where the n sound at the end of the word can is starting to resemble the g sound at the beginning of go. So actually, it sounds like the sound we have at the end of words like going and doing, the sound represented by ng. It's we can go. And then the fourth possible way of pronouncing this word can is in phrases like we can buy, where the n sound at the end of can is just before a b, so it starts to resemble a m sound. So it's not we can buy, but we can buy it.
Well, there are some more examples of this that we're going to have a listen to now. Again, listen to the two words first, and then listen to them in the sentence, and can you work out how they change?
Green Park. I walked through Green Park. Green Park. Green Park. On Monday. He arrives on Monday. On Monday. On Monday. Fine by. It's fine by me. Fine by. Fine by.
And Alan, again, if you could explain those examples.
Well, what's happening when we say Green Park is we have a n sound at the end of green, followed by a p sound at the beginning of park. So the n sound at the end of green starts to sound like a m. So instead of Green Park, it's Green Park.
And this, or it makes it easier to say, doesn't it?
Yes, I'd say that that's the normal way in which you will hear people say Green Park.
Mm.
And in the phrase on Monday, here we have a n sound at the end of on, followed by a m sound at the beginning of Monday. So this causes the n sound to change to be like a m. So it sounds like on Monday. And in the phrase it's fine by me, it's very similar. Here we have a n sound at the end of fine, followed by a b sound in by. So the n sound starts to sound like a m. So it's fine by me.
You're listening to Talk About English from the BBC World Service.
And today in Talk About English, we're looking at pronunciation and what happens to sounds when words run up against each other. Now, sometimes we heard earlier on that sounds can disappear and sounds can change. Now, sometimes this happens in a single word, or more than one thing happens at the same time. Let's have a listen to an example of that. This is from a single word.
Handbag. I can't find my handbag. Handbag. Handbag.
A handbag?
What's happening here is that we start off with three consonant sounds in a row, n, d and b. Now, because of elision, the d sound disappears. That puts the n sound next to the b sound, and it starts to change to a m. So that's assimilation. So we have elision first, followed by assimilation. So it sounds like handbag. And again, I think that's the normal pronunciation you will hear from almost everybody. Handbag.
Yes, and obviously we're not talking about a bag which you carry your ham in.
No, we're certainly not. But if we did, it would be pronounced the same way.
Yeah, right, okay. Yes. So a handbag. But would it be wrong to say a handbag?
No, it wouldn't be wrong. I mean, it's perfectly correct, and people would be easily understood. It's simply that we don't very often hear that full and complete pronunciation of every sound in the word.
That's an example from within a single word, but this also happens in sentences when words collide together. And we have an example of that now, featuring a very old London monument.
St. Paul's. I'm going to visit St. Paul's Cathedral today. St. Paul's. St. Paul's.
And so, as with handbag, St. Paul's, the same thing happening there, Alan?
Yes, it's the same kind of thing. First of all, instead of saying saint with a strong pronunciation, we're using the weak form, sunt, and then we have a n sound and a t sound and the p sound at the beginning of Paul's. And what's happening is the t sound is disappearing, that's elision. That puts the n sound next to the p, and it starts to sound like a m, so it becomes St. Paul's.
And there's one other kind of assimilation we're going to look at today, Alan.
Yes, there's a particular kind of assimilation known as coalescent assimilation, which is a little bit different from what we've been talking about so far, because in this kind of assimilation, both sounds, the two sounds, change to a third sound, which is not one of the two that we started with. For example, if we say, could you come tomorrow, we have a d sound at the end of could and a y sound at the beginning of you. What happens is that those two sounds merge together and create a third sound, which is could you come tomorrow. So we have a j sound, which we didn't have when we started. We just had d and y to start with.
Now, this is actually very common in fluent speech, isn't it, this kind of assimilation? We have a couple more examples of when you're likely to hear it.
Would you? Would you like some tea? Would you? Would you? Did you? Did you see it? Did you? Did you?
So this is very common, isn't it, Alan? Would you, could you, did you?
Yes, it's extremely common, and I think it's quite important that learners know that if, for example, they are studying the simple past tense and they see did you, that if, in fact what they're going to hear is did you. It's not did you, but did you like it. That's what it actually sounds like in normal English speech.
And we've got one final example here which puts a number of these features together. And let's have a listen to that. See if you can work out how many words are in this and what's actually being said.
Do you want to get a cuppa?
I think we should hear that one more time.
Do you want to get a cuppa?
Do you want to get a cuppa? Alan?
There are a lot of things happening here. First of all, the first two words, do you. There we have an example of coalescent assimilation because it's due. And then in the next two words, want to, we've elided the t. The t sounds of, well, in fact, both of the t sounds have disappeared. So that gives us wanna. With get a, they've linked together. So we've got a word ending with a consonant sound, get, linking with the following vowel sound to give us getter. And in the last word, cuppa, that's one word which we've made from three words, cup of tea. And we've elided quite a lot there because in fact we've elided a complete word because the word tea has completely disappeared. The f sound in of has also disappeared. It's been weakened to so it's instead of cup of tea, it's cuppa.
Right, so do you want a cup of tea? Do you want a cuppa?
That's right.
So when this happens, it's not surprising that many people find listening a difficult skill because often what you hear doesn't seem to match the words on the page. So, Alan, finally, what's your advice for students on how to deal with this in studying and learning pronunciation?
The features that we've been looking at are the inevitable result of speaking fast and fluently. So the more fluently learners speak, the more likely they are to have these features in their speech. Now, there's no particular need to deliberately practice them because it's really a mechanical process. If you speak fast enough, that's what happens. However, I think knowing about these features and knowing how they work can help a lot with listening comprehension because it can help you to decipher what you're actually hearing.
Well, I'm afraid that's all we have time for today. Alan, thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Remember, you can listen to our programmes online and do a range of exercises, including pronunciation practice, on our website at bbclearningenglish.com. Hope you can join us next time for more Talk About English. Goodbye.